Well, hello. Welcome back. Welcome back. All right. So, as I mentioned in the previous video, I'm going through chronological order as the movies are present in the series are currently. So, I've already did Rings of Power. Now, I'm going to be talking about The Hobbit. Now, just for simplicity, I'm going to simplify the I'm going to talk about the movies, The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, and The Battle of the Five Armies. But I'm going to condense it into one single review, one single video, and I'm going to keep it as short as possible. But I'm also going to try to do a few small comparisons to the book. You see, the book is not that long. It's probably like 200 pages, 200 something. You can read it in a single day, and it's very short, but it's very pleasant. I've seen people talk about The Hobbit, not just in videos, but also like in comments, saying how The Hobbit is very, that they don't like it. Personally, I liked the movie. I liked all three movies. I did appreciate how they added more story to it. Because again, The Hobbit as a book is a very short book. There isn't much to it. And so the fact that they added more story to it, for me, it is a good thing. Because if it wasn't for that, it would probably be like I don't know. It would probably be like an hour and a half movie. And that's it. And it would be just too short. So I do see why they added more to it. And even though the third movie might seem like a little bit overstretched, it was still a good movie. And it was a good send-off for that whole era of the ring. Because again, that one ring of power to rule them all and all that, it is a saga, if you will. Because it is the Lord of the Rings. But then you have the prequel, what leads up to it. And that is the story of Bilbo Baggins. Now, if we start from the beginning, we start with Bilbo. Now, Bilbo, he lives in the Shire. Different from the hobbits from the Rings of Power, the series, these hobbits have their own home, which is the Shire. And they live in the ground, in a hole in the ground. Not just any hole, not just any nasty hole, but it's comfort, it's home, it's warm, it's a clean hole, it's a hobbit hole. Now, I kind of butchered that introduction from The Lord of the Rings, but it gives you the idea that the hobbits, at this point, they are a species that are very homely. They love their home. They love their comforts. They're not looking for trouble. And they're not off trying to solve the problems of the world. They live in their own bubble. Bilbo is no exception. He is comfortable where he is, where his food is, where his home, with the people he knows. Anything that is strange or unfamiliar, he's not comfortable with it. But is he? At this point, Gandalf returns back to the Shire after a long absence, and he visits his friend, Bilbo. Bilbo remembers him. Well, not at first, but eventually he does remember him. And he remembers him as the wizard who brought the fireworks. Ooh, fireworks. However, he doesn't want any part of any adventure. He just wants to stay at home. Gandalf is not happy with that response. So he goes ahead and says, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll bring you back to how you used to be. Because as it turns out, Bilbo, when he was younger, he was actually curious about the world. He was adventurous. He was wanting to get out of his bubble and be a part of something much bigger. Does that remind you of somebody? Nori? Frodo? Anyway, when when night falls, after several days, he receives a visit. That visit comes in the form of several dwarves. And these dwarves, well, let's say that they're not the most polite of guests. They start asking for food, they start eating all the food, they start belching and making a mess out of the place. That's where we meet the party. We meet Thorin, Balin, Dwalin, Bifor, Bofor, Bombur, Fili, Kili, Oin, Gloin, and even Nori. No, not that Nori, but this Nori, a dwarf. Dori, Ori, and these dwarves, they're on a mission. Because you see, they are looking for a robber, a burglar. But as Bilbo points out, he's not a burglar. But Gandalf, he is not convinced. He tells them he is a burglar. And if he says it that he's a burglar, he is a burglar. Alright. So eventually it's up to Bilbo. And Bilbo at this point is not inclined to go, but he does hear the song and the story of the dwarves, who were cast away from the Misty Mountains by the appearance of Smaug, a dragon, who took possession over their treasures that they had dug so deep in the mountain for, and now they were nomads. And even though they made a life of their own, and they were able to thrive, despite being outcast from their land, they still yearn to go back home. And not just that, but there is a sadness, a longing, which, if you have ever been away from home, when you live alone, you do kind of want to go back to that feeling of comfort, to where you feel you belong, where you remember good times. But they can't, because there's a dragon who is going to eat them. And so that's why they need Bilbo's help. Bilbo does eventually accept, and so they're on their way. Now, something that kind of changed in the from the book and the movies is that they meet with Tom Bombadil. While Tom Bombadil is made out to be in the movies like this giant shapeshifter, um, who is the last of his species, and he was captured and made out alive, and in the books, Tom Bombadil, how can I explain it? Tom Bombadil is Tom Bombadil. Nobody knows when he first appeared, but Tom Bombadil, he's a jolly old fellow. Like, if you see him, he's a big man who is very happy all the time and takes care of the forest. However, he is also very protective. He's very protective of his sweetheart, which is a river fairy who, in appearance, is a beautiful woman. Now, Tom Bombadil has this thing which, at night, he becomes a big bear, a massive bear, one that you wouldn't want to meet alone in the wild. They meet him. There's no eventualities, and they make it out alive, and well, they continue on their way. In the movie, they make him out to be like he survived and he's a survivor. He's the last of his species. He has a very tormented past, which is kind of odd because then it still doesn't come to play. He still protects them from the orcs that are hunting them down, but anyway, it's still too weird. Now, in the movie, they are being hunted down by these orcs who the leader of that group of orcs, they were actually the ones that killed um, Thorin's father or grandfather. I mean, either way, they were the ones who have caused him a lot of pain in the past, and they're hunting Thorin down because the leader of the orcs, had said that's going to be his mission, his life mission, to extinguish the line of Thorin. All right, be it as it may. The next up is the forest, and this is kind of like another change in the story because in the book they make it in the forest. The forest is a dark forest. I mean, there's so dense with trees that there's no lights. And they reach to this point where they have to cross a river. And Bilbo finds a way in which he can throw a rope to a branch that's across the river, swing across, and then have people cross after him. And that's how they do it. Now, in the movie, they make it out like it's a forest that makes them get lost, makes them go in circles. But there's also these massive, well, I don't even want to say it. Let's say they're your eight-legged nightmare. And they make it out like that is what's attacking them in the forest until they meet the elves. Now, the elves, these are the same elves from, well, in the movie, they're the same elves that Legolas is from. In the book, that is not the case. But this is where the fun actually begins because Bilbo is hidden. They can't hear him because he's Hobbit. They don't notice him because, well, they don't. And I should probably clarify, before they reached the forest, they had gone through these mountains where and the mountains I'm talking about are the mountains of Moria. Because if you remember, you have the Misty Mountains, but you also have Moria, which is another group of mountains. And that's where Bilbo found the ring, the one ring. And we get the riddles in the dark, which basically when he gets introduced to Smeagol, to Gollum, I should say, Gollum wants to eat him, and the way that they make it out is that if he can answer the riddles and he wins the game, then he stays alive. Gollum actually doesn't intend to keep up with his end of the bargain. Regardless if he loses or wins, he's still going to kill him. But Bilbo had found the ring beforehand. Gollum didn't know this. And that's where you have that infamous riddle about, what's a box filled with gold that doesn't have a latch or that you can't open. That would be an egg, or, there's like different riddles that he answers. But the last one, he's not sure what to ask, and it's Bilbo's turn. And obviously, if Gollum answers, he wins. If Gollum doesn't answer, then Bilbo wins. However, he's not sure what to ask, and Gollum is really good with riddles. And it's not until he finds, or feels, I should say, the ring in his pocket. He asks, what is in my pocket? Not intending it as a riddle, but since he did ask, now Gollum has to answer. Gollum is not able to answer, but he does figure out that maybe he has something. Maybe he has something that he lost. And that's when Bilbo accidentally puts on the ring, and now he's invisible. And he notices that he gets invisible. Gollum doesn't see him. The orcs don't see him, as he was separated from the dwarves. When he sees the dwarves again, he runs after them to the exit. So now that he has found the ring in the forest, when the elves capture the dwarves, Bilbo is not to be seen because he has the ring on. He does manage to escape with the dwarves using some barrels and going into the river, and that's where they reach this city. Now, the book doesn't make a lot of mention about this city next to the Misty Mountains, but uh, in the movie they do make a big deal in which the people who didn't help them, who didn't help the dwarves when they're being invaded by the dragon, they make it out. They help them out only when they promise to share the gold with them. Not just that, but you know, they do make several promises. Otherwise, they would be put in prison. Once they make it to the Misty Mountains, though, Bilbo has to go inside, and that's where he finds the dragon. Now, the dragon smells something. He hasn't seen or smelled a hobbit in such a long time. He probably hasn't even smelled a hobbit before. So he knows there's something, but he doesn't know what it is. And since Bilbo is invisible, it's not like he can just see him, but he can smell him. Now, Smog, that's the name of the dragon, Smog does say something very interesting, which is that he is tempted to give back the Arkenstone, the one treasure that Thorin really wants, because he would want to see Thorin be corrupted by the stone, which is what happened to his grandfather. He was so corrupted by the stone that he needed more gold, more treasure, more precious metals. I mean, he wouldn't stop. And that could be more terrifying. Greed can be terrifying to the point where it could be more terrifying than even a dragon. Now, Bilbo finds a way of getting the dragon, getting away from the dragon. And he does manage to get his hands on the stone, afterwards. But when he gets back to the dwarves, they make a plan. They get the dragon out of there, they kill him. But the dragon did wreak havoc in the small town. And in the movie, it was a descendant of like the town governor, you could say, who saved them, but he also died. And the bard, who is the descendant of that man, he has the weapon that was used against the dragon. He manages to kill the dragon, and the town is left in such a state that they say, well, let's go to the dwarves and see if they can help fix things. And they do, but the dwarves reject the notion because they are just wanting to take advantage. Now, Thorin at this point had been looking for the Arkenstone, a stone that was found deep inside the mountain, very shiny, very precious, and that is the one thing that he wanted from the mountain, because him having the Arkenstone was in a way like a divine sign that they are legitimate and would inspire other dwarves and other people to go and trade with them. That is why the stone is so important. But Bilbo finds the stone, and he doesn't really want to share it with Thorin, not because he is out of greed wanting the stone, but because he doesn't want Thorin's mind to be corrupted. He wants to save his friend. In this journey, they had been becoming, every single one of them, so close. The dwarves consider Bilbo the Hobbit as a dear friend, and Bilbo also considers them as friends that he wants to help to get their home back. Now they have their home back, but he doesn't want Thorin to be corrupted by the stone. Now, a sign of this corruption is that Thorin has become very paranoid about maybe one of the other dwarves have stolen the Arkenstone without him knowing. and also refusing to help the townspeople who had, you know, given them some supplies so that they can continue to the Misty Mountains. So they fortify themselves inside, and Bilbo makes his way outside to meet up with the townspeople. Now, the townspeople at this point are met up with a group of elves, the same elves from the forest, the Dark Forest, and also with Gandalf, who has reappeared. They're trying to find a way to negotiate with the dwarves, but they have no leverage until Bilbo comes and says, well, I have what he wants the most, this Arkenstone. You can trade it, consider it my share of the profits, just that. Offer it as a trade, and, you know, there you go, everybody wins. Now, Thorin wasn't that happy about it, and he does get mad at Bilbo. But also, they are shortly attacked by orcs and goblins. In the movie, they do make it very funny, and in the third movie, the Battle of the Five Armies, with one of the dwarven kin, so one of the other dwarves related to them, arrive, and they arrive on these war pigs, and they start, you know, hammering down the orcs and everything. It was very funny in the movie, but in the book, it's basically you have the different armies of dwarves, you have the elves, you have townspeople, you have the armies of orcs and goblins, and you have a mess. Now, in the book, the battle lasts for about a few seconds because they make a mention that Bilbo is also fighting. He gets hit when a battle starts. Something hits his head, loses consciousness, and when he wakes up, it's already over. In the movie, they make it a whole ordeal. That, you know, they're fighting and then they're losing, but then they make it out, and then they find out that the leader of the goblins, of the orcs, has like this complex Roman style strategy to attack them using signs, and then they go after him, and then it, you know, it's a whole thing, and it's actually well done. It reminded me a lot about the Two Towers and about the fight to protect Gondor. So these huge battle scenes, it kind of remind me of that. Now, here's the thing. In the movie, they introduce this kind of weird love triangle between it's Legolas, it's maybe Philly or Kili. I think it's Kili, and an elf, another elf. This love triangle doesn't exist in the book. However, in the movie, it does seem a little bit unnecessary, and I don't know. I mean, I guess you could say, because what ends up happening in the movie is that Keely gets killed by the orc, and the female elf, she loses him and she loves him, and she's very sad. Legolas sees how much it hurts her, and it also hurts him, but he doesn't try anything, as in like, oh, now we can be together. He respects her loss, and his father, the king, actually makes does say something interesting about how love hurts, but it's necessary. I can't remember the exact quote, but the thing is, in the movie, I can see that maybe they're going for that. That's why Legolas was open to a friendship with Gimli in the Lord of the Rings, because he had experience with how courageous and how noble dwarves can be. But at the same time, it's not. It's kind of weird because you could make that case, but there really is no reason for this love triangle. If you excluded the love triangle, you wouldn't lose any part of the story in The Hobbit. So that is kind of like one element where, okay, Like the townspeople, they weren't much included in the book, but when you add that, and it adds to how complex the relationship between dwarves and the other races is, and their place within kind of like this kingdom of sorts. Like it really does develop this background on who they are and their place in the Middle Earth, right? But when we talk about this love triangle, that is not the case. So I'm not sure why they did it. Now, at any rate, when it finishes, Bilbo goes home. He does pay his respects because Thorin and others died, but he was very close with Thorin. When he goes back with a small chest filled with treasure, with gold and diamonds and stuff, and he also comes back with Sting, his which is an elven knife, but due to the size of Hobbit, that knife is more like a sword. He goes back home, finds that the the Secondses, or it's like another Hobbit family, but it's related to the Baggins, who are auctioning his stuff. He proves with the contract that he had with Thorin that he is really Bilbo Baggins and that he is not dead yet, he's alive. And if you remember in The Lord of the Rings, he talks about how Bathilda or some relative was making off with the silverware, which is why when they are near the home, he hides all the forks and knives and spoons and all that. And this is kind of why, so this is kind of like a very funny tidbit, but still, it is. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but it is a fun movie. The three movies are good. But what's important about this is that it really felt like the end of an era because you are no longer going to talk about the ring of power. You're no longer going to see Middle Earth as you see it through the eyes of a hobbit who is trying to survive in a world post Sauron or post battle, however you want to call it. You do get to see other eras of Middle Earth, such as with the Rings of Power. You're seeing a different era, not the same as in the Lord of the Rings or the same as the Hobbit. So when the Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies, ended, it was the perfect ending of a whole era. The Lord of the Rings had been from 2001, 2002, 2003. Then you had the Hobbits, Desolation of Smaug, Battle of the Five Armies, that were intimate together. They were very tied together, story-wise. But it did feel like a conclusion. If we talk about the Rings of Power, it happens in the same universe. It happens in Middle Earth, but it is a different story altogether. There might be elements that are shared and that you can reference. It's still a separate story. Not just that, but when we talk about, um, well, if you've seen the ending, The Last Goodbye, it's such a perfect song because again, it's the closing of a whole book. It's the closing of a chapter, more than of a chapter. And this one was sung by uh, Billy Boyd, who was Pippin in The Lord of the Rings. It really is the perfect send off for this series. Again, The Hobbit is really intimate in the plot when it comes to The Lord of the Rings. I myself enjoyed it. I appreciate how much more story they added to it. I know some people didn't like it, and some of the comments are like, it was terrible, blah blah blah. But I personally liked it. But what do you think? Did you like it? Have you seen it? Do you want to see it now? Maybe, maybe not. At any rate, that's all for today. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe, stay healthy, and just remember, always remember, be kind to those around you. You never know what they're going through. Bye-bye.